Good morning. Today we're going to be talking about the properties of operations. We're going to learn 3 different properties today, and we'll learn the 4th a little bit later on in the week. So the first property is called the commutative property of there's addition and multiplication. Notice that it starts with a CO, so I'm going to give you a little phrase to help you remember what this means. Commutative property, remember, order in the court, order in the court. So the order part is going to help you remember that the order does not matter when we're talking about the commutative property. Here is an example. Use these as our equal sign. If I am adding a blue chip plus a white chip plus a red chip, that is the exact same thing as if I added a white chip plus a blue chip plus a red chip. Even though the order is different of the chips, since we can add them in any order and it equals the same thing. The same thing is true of multiplication. If I were to multiply a blue chip times a white chip times a red chip, it would equal still a white chip times a blue chip times a red chip. Let's look at it with some numbers. Let's check it. 3 plus 4 is 7. 7 plus 2 is 9. 2 plus 4 is 6. 6 plus 3 is 9. 9 equals 9. What about with multiplication? So 2 times 5 is 10. 10 times 3 is 30. 3 times 2 is 6. 6 times 5 is 30. All right, the next property is the associative property. And when we're talking about the associative property, I want you to take the root word associate, and we're going to say the phrase, the associates come in groups. The associates come in groups. My little picture, I have 3 little people together on either side. The associates come in groups. And that's to tell us that the grouping doesn't matter. So I can group them together differently, and it will still be the same thing. A key thing with associative property is a lot of times you will have parentheses. So I can say that blue plus parentheses red plus white equals in parentheses blue plus red and parentheses plus white. What about if I add numbers to this? Okay, will equal the same thing. So I have the 2 and the 5 grouped here and the 3 and the 2 grouped here. What about if I solve it? PEMDAS tells us to add the parentheses first. So 2 plus 5 is 10. Plus 3 is 13. And over here we have 3 plus 2 is 6. Plus 5 is 13. So you can group the numbers differently if they're all addition, and that doesn't make a difference. You can do the same thing with multiplication. So 2 times 4 is 8. 8 times 3 is 24. 4 times 3 is 12, and 12 times 2 is 24. So the associative property says that we can group the numbers differently and that you will still end up getting the same answer. Both the commutative property and the associative property are going to be very, very helpful later when we start talking about equations and adding and subtracting positive and negative numbers, because we can change the order or we can group numbers differently in order to make it easier to do and to work with. The last property that we're going to talk about is the identity property. The identity property is all about numbers wanting to keep their identity. They want to stay the same. So, if I was a blue chip, okay, what number can I add to myself to make sure that I stay just a blue chip? Right, 0. If I add 0 to myself, I'm going to stay the same because adding 0 does nothing. I keep my identity. So if this number, if instead of it being a blue chip, if it was a 4, 4 plus what equals 4, because I want to stay the same, is a 0. So the identity property of addition says that if I add 0 to any number, it will stay the same. Okay, what about multiplication? What number can I multiply myself times in order to stay the same? Right, 1. So the identity property of multiplication says that, let's say that my number was 61 and I want to stay the same, so I want to stay a 61. I can multiply myself times 1. So the identity property of multiplication says any number times 1 still equals itself. Well, now you have learned all three properties. Remember that the commutative property, order in the court, the order doesn't matter. Associative property, the associates come in groups, the grouping doesn't matter. And the identity property, I want to stay myself.